The Silver Witch and the Red Bull. Primer verso. In the quiet of the darkness, I learned I had gained and lost everything, all at once. Chapter 1. Javier. Winter of 1984. Javier's head spun, and a wave of lightheadedness washed over him. The doctor's lips moved. The words coming out of his mouth were still in Spanish, but Javier couldn't understand them anymore. He felt a squeeze on his hand. He turned to see his younger sister, Maria, sitting up on the dusty, ragged mattress they had salvaged from the street. He recalled how excited she had been about it at first, thrilled to replace their old one, which had been riddled with holes. The excitement in her hazel green eyes was faded now, replaced by a look of determination. "It's going to be okay, Javier," she croaked, her hand rubbing his. Javier squeezed his eyes shut, feeling his heart race. This couldn't be happening. He must have not heard correctly. He opened his eyes and barely managed. "Lo siento, señor. What was it you said?" The doctor put away his stethoscope, his voice indifferent, as though he hadn't just shattered Javier's world into pieces. "Your sister has pneumonia, Javier. If she doesn't get to a hospital soon, she could die." Javier looked down at his shoes. He had found them next to a trash can. The soles were coming off, but he had taped them to hold. "I can't afford a doctor." The doctor glanced at Javier, lingering on the holes in his clothes and the smudges of dirt on his face. "Lo siento, Javier. Maybe—" His eye swept over their brick home, its makeshift roof of scavenged tin and plastic. "If you could take her somewhere that wasn't—" "Here?" Javier clenched his fists. "We don't have anywhere else to go." The doctor looked at him with a pitying expression that Javier knew all too well. "It's not good for Maria to stay here." As if on cue, Maria began to cough. Javier quickly grabbed a glass of water from the table and waited for her coughing fit to subside before offering her a drink. "Well, as promised, I came to see what was wrong with your sister," the doctor said. "You'll hold your end up of the bargain?" Javier gritted his teeth as he crouched next to Maria, waiting for her cough to pass. "Yes, I won't tell anyone that I saw you with a woman who wasn't your wife." "Good," the doctor replied, but then hesitated, as if he were about to say something more. Instead, he simply opened the stick door and left. As the doctor departed, Maria's coughing finally settled. She took a sip of water and extended a shaky hand toward Javier's face, trying to cup his cheek. Javier grabbed her hand, pressing his dirty forehead against it. "Don't worry, Javier. I just need a couple of more days, and I'll be fine. Ya verás." Her words felt like a stab to his chest. She could hardly get out of bed these days. She was lying to comfort him, the only gift she had left to offer. The weight of their dual existence pressed down on him now. He had thought about this over and over before, but it had been a while since he voiced it, and today he couldn't hold it back. "Lo siento, Maria. If only this wasn't your life. If only—" "Javier, stop," she rasped. "You know I hate it when you talk like that. If this wasn't my life, it would mean that I wouldn't be your sister. You'd be better off if you weren't." Though he didn't speak the words aloud, he believed them, and they haunted him. Since birth, Javier had been cursed with poverty and destitution. He never knew his father, and as for his mother, she was a nervous wreck. Always yelling, always hitting, always complaining there was never enough, always blaming their endless hardships on him and Maria. Javier was only 12 when she left. Maria was 8, and he was glad for it. As far as he was concerned, they were better off without her. Through all this adversity, Javier's constant saving grace had been his one and only sister, Maria. He had only been 5 years old when Maria was born, a child who hadn't known much happiness or warmth. But when he held her soft newborn body in his tiny arms and felt her little fists wrap around his finger, Javier's heart glowed. Through thick and thin, they had been together, holding each other through cold, hungry nights, sharing stories and dreams of full bellies and one day owning a real home. one with a wooden door and tiled floors. Now, staring into her gaunt eyes and dry lips, he felt those dreams slowly sink deeper into a place where they could no longer be reached. He had to put a stop to it. He had to save her, and he knew exactly how to do it. Javier, ¿qué estás pensando? Her voice was scratchy and weak, getting on Javier's ears like nails on a chalkboard. He swallowed hard, recalling the dark glances his sister cast whenever neighborhood children disappeared one by one, whispering to him, Se llevaron otro. They took another one. He knew his sister wouldn't approve of this idea, yet he gave it voice, saying gently, We need to get you to a hospital, Maria. He caressed her cheek. But even if we make it there, we'll need money for your medicines. You know who might be able to help us. Maria snatched her hand away from Javier's grip, her face bewildered, as though she couldn't believe what she had just heard. How could you suggest that, after everything I've told you about them? Maria, no, Javier, she said weakly. Do not go to them. You'll be selling more than your soul if you do. Promise me you won't, she breathed, triggering another coughing fit. Javier quickly grabbed the glass of water from the table and brought it to her, rubbing her back and waiting patiently for the fit to subside. You can't expect me to just let you die, Maria, he said softly. She took a small sip of water before lying back down, her eyes heavy. She muffled, If you sign with those men, you'll be signing both our deaths. Promise me you won't. She squeezed his hand. I promise I'll get better soon. He tried for a smile. Okay, está bien. I promise I won't see them. It was the first of many promises that Javier would break. When night fell and Maria was asleep, he quietly crept out of their home and began walking. He knew exactly where he was going. Everyone in town knew where Diego stayed, and he was no exception. The wind seemed to guide him towards the bright lights. When he arrived at La Diabla Cantina, he opened the door and was immediately greeted by Peña, an old stubby man with a mustache too big for his face. ¿Qué estás haciendo aquí, chamaco? Javier cleared his throat, feeling his nerves begin to race. I'm here to see Diego. Peña didn't even look up. Vete a la casa, chamaco. We already got enough dead children as it is. But Javier stood his ground. I need to see him. It's important. My sister Maria, she's sick, Javier explained. This time, Peña slammed his hand down, looking at Javier dead in the eyes. Diego isn't seeing any more of you kids, he growled. Now get out before I get mad. Javier swallowed, but he didn't back down. I need to see Diego. I need to save my sister. The burn against his cheek was sharp and unexpected. He fell back, his hand going to his face, touching the area that had been slapped. I told you, Peña growled, stomping toward him. Javier's first instinct was to scoot back, to run out of La Cantina and never look back, to tell Maria that he couldn't do it, and to pray that she would be okay. But he knew from experience that prayers weren't worth a damn, and the only way to get Maria back to health would be to strike this deadly bargain. So, instead of running, he got up and charged toward Peña. Peña had been caught by surprise and almost fell back, but didn't. Instead, he grabbed the collar of Javier's shirt, throwing the young boy down and starting to beat him. Every blow to Javier's body was a fresh sting of pain that he hadn't felt in a while. He had to admit that even his mother had never beaten him this hard. But still, he wouldn't leave. He would stick this out, even if it meant he would die in the process. Because in the end, if Maria died, that meant that he might as well be dead too. What's going on here? Javier felt relief from the blows. Through his already swelling eyes, he looked up and saw the outline of a man standing a couple feet away from him and Peña. Don Diego, Peña uttered quickly. This boy here was causing a ruckus. I was teaching him a lesson. Well, you're also being disruptive, Diego said. His voice was quiet, but carried a weight that Javier could feel even from the floor. From his position on the ground, Javier watched as a pair of sleek black shoes approached him. Before he knew it, he was looking up at the face of a man with walnut-colored skin and dark eyebrows. ¿Qué estás haciendo aquí, niño? He asked. Javier opened his mouth to speak, but found that no sound was coming out. Instead, he felt as though he was shrinking under the gaze of the man's powdered blue eyes. Well, if you don't need anything, the man said, beginning to rise. Panic surged in Javier's voice as he spoke rapidly. My sister, she's sick. I came to make a deal. I've made enough deals for the year, the man said coldly, and this time he did get up, turning his body away from Javier. Javier's hand moved on his own, grabbing the man by the ankle. Please, I'll do anything. I'll give anything. Although the man's facial expression remained blank, Javier could have sworn there was a gleam in his eyes that there hadn't been there before. Well, in that case, I believe I can take one more, he said, then turned to Peña. Peña, have someone clean the boy up and send him up to my office. Sí, señor, Peña uttered, grabbing Javier by the collar of his shirt and lifting him to his feet. In a swift sequence of movements, Javier was taken to a bathroom, where a girl with long black raven hair began cleaning him up. Whatever you're thinking of doing right now, she said, dabbing a hot cloth over the cut above his eye, caused by one of Peña's rings. Don't. This isn't a place for kids. Javier felt a twinge of annoyance. This girl didn't seem much older than him, and worked at La Diabla Cantina. She was much closer to the chaos than he ever was. I could say the same for you, he snapped. She stopped dabbing the hot cloth over his eye and grabbed a thick bandage, pressing on the wound a bit harder than Javier felt was necessary. Unlike you, I'm not stupid enough to throw my life away. I was born here. Javier was taken aback by her response and wanted to ask her more, but she suddenly got up. I'm done, she said. You should leave this place. If you walk into that office, you'll be sealing your fate forever. Javier got up and walked past her, reaching the edge of the staircase that led up to Diego's office. Like you, my fate was sealed the moment I was born, he said, then began his ascent. When he reached the top of the staircase, he found the red door slightly ajar. Pasa, Diego said. Javier complied, and turned to find Diego seated at the far end of a massive mahogany desk. Siéntate, Diego ordered, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Javier examined the chair. It looked almost too fine to sit on, but he took a seat anyway. Now, Diego said, interlacing his fingers, tell me what brought you here. Javier cleared his throat, finding his courage. My sister's sick. She has pneumonia and needs medical attention. A hospital, or she'll die. I thought... Javier paused. Maybe you could help me. Help us. I've seen you help other kids in my neighborhood. Certainly I can help you, Diego said. I can get you and your sister into the best hospital in Oaxaca, and have her seen by the finest doctors. Javier's face lit up. But there is a price, Diego continued, his tone serious. All who seek my help must pay it. I'm sure you know that. Javier swallowed. He had anticipated this. I don't have any money. You know that's not what I meant, Diego said, his eyes narrowing. Javier nodded, understanding all too well. Part of him wished this was simply a monetary debt. What do I have to do, then? Whatever it is that I will ask of you, Diego said with a smile. The 4 pillars will provide for you and your family. Your sister, whom you care for so much, will be looked after. Survive long enough, and you'll rise to the top ranks. All you need to do is serve, for the rest of your life. Can you do that? Javier closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the deal wash over him. Serve the 4 pillars for the rest of his life, and he would save his sister. If he didn't, his sister was as good as dead. It was a life for a life. He could do this. I can, Javier said. Diego grinned, rising from his chair and walking to the fireplace. Perfect. Now, for your first test, will you be strong enough to seal the deal? Sweat began to bead on Javier's forehead as he watched Diego pull a branding iron from the fireplace. Let me see your forearm. Javier felt his heart begin to race as Diego approached him. Slowly, with trembling hands, he revealed his bare, skinny forearm. Satisfied, Diego looked into the eyes of the dirty boy before him. "Remind me of your name, boy." "Javier. Javier del Torro," Javier said, gritting his teeth, his heart pounding in anticipation of the inevitable. "That's a strong name. I look forward to working with you, Javier del Torro," Diego replied, grabbing Javier's arm by the wrist and ever so gently pressing the hot iron on Javier's bare flesh. Not even 3 hours after Javier had sealed the contract with the 4 pillars, Maria was admitted to Hospital Clínica Santa Anita, the best general hospital in Oaxaca. His forearm throbbed and burned incessantly, but the relief he felt at seeing Maria cared for overshadowed the pain. It made it all the better that Diego had told him he could start his service once Maria was better and living in a proper home, not that shack of a house, as Diego had called it. Javier knew the deal he had struck was a deadly one. He understood that the day would come when he would have to pay, perhaps even with his life. But for now, a sense of comfort enveloped him, and he couldn't help but feel grateful. When Maria opened her eyes, Javier lied through smiling lips, telling her he had found a hospital that took care of charity cases like theirs at no cost. Maria was a smart girl, and Javier wasn't sure if he would get away with the lie, but to his relief, she did not question it. Instead, the days passed in peace, and it seemed to Javier that Maria was getting better and stronger. Watching her recover, he felt a weight lift off his chest. His sacrifice had not been in vain. "Javier, why aren't you going to work anymore?" Maria asked. Javier looked at her from the hospital chair, flipping through the cable channels on TV. It had been 3 days since Maria had been admitted, and she was set to receive her discharge papers the following day. Other than some persistent coughing, she seemed to be almost fully recovered. "Oh," Javier said, leaving the channel on a rerun of the telenovela Chispita. "Well, I haven't been going, so I can be here to take care of you." At this, Maria's eyes narrowed. "I know you're lying, Javier. You've been lying since the start." Javier felt his heart race as he looked into his sister's golden brown eyes. "Maria, I swear I'm not." Maria grabbed his wrist with a force that Javier didn't know she had. She pulled up his sleeve, revealing a diamond-shaped scar on his forearm. He quickly yanked his arm away, rolling down his sleeve to cover the burn. A tense silence fell between them as Javier looked at Maria's downcast face. "Maria, it's not..." Javier felt a sharp sting across his face and stared in shock at his sister's raised, trembling hand. "I told you," she seethed, "not to go with them. I told you I would get better, that we didn't need their help." She shouted the last word. Javier stared, dumbfounded at her anguished face, her eyes filled with anger and tears. His chest began to throb. "Maria, this was the only way," Javier explained. "No, it wasn't." "Yes, it was," Javier exclaimed, now standing and looming over her. "If I hadn't brought you here, you would have died." "Then you should have left me to die," she shouted. The words struck Javier even harder than the slap, and he heard the helplessness in his voice. "How could you say that to me?" "Because," she cried, her sobs breaking through, "I would have rather died than watch you become a monster." "Maria," Javier breathed, "I'm going to be okay, I promise." "No, you're not," Maria shouted. "It's not just a life sentence, Javier. It's a life sentence for your entire family. Those people will never let you go. You will die serving them. And then, once you're gone, your son will serve, and his son after him. You will never be free. You didn't just curse yourself. You cursed your entire lineage." Javier was speechless. He wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't thought things that far. Who's to say he would even have children in the future, especially if the case was that they would also be born into servitude. Maria continued to sob loudly into her hands. "Who is going to save you now, Javier?" she croaked. "Who is going to save you from the 4 most powerful people in Mexico?" "Maria," Javier said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. To his surprise, she grabbed it and held it close as she cried. "Who is going to save you, brother? Who?" "You don't have to worry about that, Maria," he said, gently stroking her hair. "I'm your older brother. It's my job to save you." But despite his comforting words, Maria's wails didn't cease. Javier stayed beside her until she cried herself to sleep. The fever Maria contracted that night would always haunt Javier, leaving him to wonder if it had been caused by his actions. All the joy and relief he had felt in the past days, as he watched her recover, vanished the moment her lung collapsed. When the doctors pronounced her dead the next morning, Javier questioned if he was cursed. Leaving the hospital in a daze, he found a black BMW waiting for him. Standing beside it was Diego Lopez. "Well, shall we go?" Diego asked, opening the car door. Javier glanced at the inside of the car. The black leather seat seemed like a portal to another world, a darker world. "I would have rather died than watch you become a monster." Maria's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time since her death, Javier didn't feel as burdened. Maybe this was for the best. Now, she wouldn't have to see what came next.